Incorrect. The suspect has never been in handcuffs. In South Africa, thousands of blacks are refusing to leave a township near Pretoria, which has been officially shut down by the government. Community leaders at the township say they'll fight the decision to abolish their homes and relocate families. The government says the move isn't racist and claims it had no option because it would cost too much to upgrade the township.
Sundays in Okazi Township have been like this for 55 years. But Sundays here are numbered now. While the children sang, their parents gathered to organize resistance to white government plans to break a promise to blacks. Nearly 2 years ago, government ministers said there would be no more forced removals of black townships. But they have just announced that Okazi is to be knocked down, the residents sent 12 miles away. The township has no electricity, no paved roads, and a bucket toilet system. Officials say the community must be uprooted because upgrading from a slum to a decent place to live would be too expensive. The people here don't believe it.
This white boys, this guy, they want to come and build it for the white here, you see.
A few years ago, whites began putting up expensive new homes within 100 yards of the black community. The ruling National Party is in danger of losing the area to its right-wing opposition. Moving the black township is seen as one way to help stave off that threat. Whenever anyone does move from Okazi, the authorities break down their house so no one else can occupy it. The 10,000 residents claim it will cost less to give them decent services than to move them, and still hope the government will change its mind.
Back home, workers at a Christchurch engineering firm have reversed their decision to accept a private wage deal with their employers. The workers accepted a 5% interim wage increase last week, but were today persuaded by their union to reconsider the offer.
Silver Dolphin Industries deals largely in stainless steel processing. Last week, following the lead by Fisher & Paykel in Dunedin, the engineers here did a deal with the management for a 5% wage adjustment, thereby sidestepping the national award and industrial action that may surround it. On Friday, the union took a secret ballot after a meeting with workers, a ballot that left the union saying the workers had changed their minds and the Employers Association saying they hadn't. So the head of the union in Canterbury came out today to conduct another secret ballot. The outcome? They voted to stick with the union and the award and reject the previously agreed 5% with the employer. And 30 out of approximately 50 workers were in favour of taking that action.
Under the circumstances, an emotional type meeting, and there were some people who were confused at the end of the meeting as to what they had voted on, and as a consequence of that, was my opinion that a further meeting should be conducted and rerun.
What was the reaction of the management when you advised them that the earlier decision had been reversed?
They were reasonably non-committal.
Did that surprise you?
Not really, no.
As for Silver Dolphin's side of the story, there isn't one. The general manager's no comment didn't even extend to an expression of disappointment.
We've just had reports coming in this evening to say that Mozambique's President Samora Machel is missing, presumed killed, in a plane crash. The Mozambique news agency says President Machel was on board a plane which crashed in South Africa while on a flight from Zambia to Mozambique. And that's tonight's news summary. Still to come, we check on the day's events on the money markets and we report on developments in our primary industry. In the north, a multi-million-dollar irrigation scheme is planned, while out at sea, there's a new scheme to preserve our inshore fishing resources, but it's already come under attack. Now the day's financial news, and the share market continued its upward movement today. The Barclays Index rose to its 66th new high for the year. It's climbed nearly 1,500 points since trading began in January. The New Zealand Stock Exchange was dominated by leading property and investment companies today. Market leaders registered some significant price rises, but they weren't on their own. There were also substantial rises among some second-liners, but others registered the day's biggest drops. On the foreign exchange market, the downward drift that the Kiwi dollar has shown over the last few days was reversed today as offshore buying pushed the price up. The Reserve Bank's estimate at 3 showed the New Zealand dollar in a marginally stronger position against all 5 of the international currencies we monitor.
Fishermen are to get a second chance to opt out of the industry in return for financial compensation. This week, the government announces details of its second tender round aimed at preserving our overfished inshore waters. Eyewitness News understands that several big operators have already been paid close to $1 million to get out. But other smaller operators are still suffering, and there are doubts that the scheme will work. Benny Deans reports on the winners and losers.
If they go ahead with the proposed cuts, it puts us out of business. It just completely takes our income away.
What I've got now in the fisheries is a saleable commodity, if you'd like to put it that way, that I can hand down to my family.
The pessimism and the optimism are both the result of the same government plans for conserving the inshore fishery. It's trying to cut the catch by 30% overall. And in doing so, it's created some newly rich and some who fear poverty.
Well, it's affected us fairly drastically. At present, we're looking at 75% cut on our prime species, the fish that we mainly target for, you know. So we're looking pretty good.
Ian Mackenzie is one of two fishermen working from Karamea in North Westland. Last year he caught 40 tonnes of rig and school shark, which netted him an income of $10,000. This year his quota could be set as low as 15 tonnes. His projected net income, just $3,000. The reason for the cuts is to preserve dwindling stocks of fish in New Zealand's inshore waters.
I don't believe that we've got a declining fishery here. Our fishery seems to have been very stable for the last 4 or 5 years. We're still catching the same amount of fish for the same amount of effort.
The other man fishing commercially from Karamea is Selwyn Lowe. He's been guaranteed just a quarter his usual catch, an amount which jeopardises his future here. And he too believes the cuts are necessary.
I personally think that the cuts for our area are too strong. You know, it supports us well. Our fishing is stable. It hasn't really declined at all.
No matter what individual fishermen think, MAF research shows that inshore waters have been devastated by overfishing. The solution, a radically different way of controlling the catch. For administrative purposes, New Zealand's inshore fisheries now divided up into several areas. Each area has a total allowable catch for each species, an amount which MAF thinks will conserve the stock and allow sustained harvesting. That catch is divided up between all the fishermen in the area into individual transferable quotas, or ITQs. An ITQ is in effect a sort of property right of ownership of a certain proportion of the fish in any given area. Each fisherman has the right to catch a certain tonnage of, say, rig each year. If he wants to catch more than his share, then he's got to buy quota from another fisherman. If, however, he decides to reduce his catch, the government will pay him to do so. In effect, a sort of voluntary redundancy. The government set aside $55 million for the purpose of buying out fishermen like Ian Mackenzie and Selwyn Lowe. The so-called buyback scheme operates on a tender basis. In Ian Mackenzie's case, for example, he offered to sell the government the difference between his average catch of rig over the past 3 years, 21 tonnes, and the quota they gave him, 5 tonnes. But the government said his tender was too high and turned him down. That's been the case with most tenders around the country. The ministry's so far spent just $20 of the $55 million allocated to restructure the industry. It says the first tenders were too high and is now holding a second tender round in which it has set the prices. But it's also warned that if fishermen don't opt to sell back their fishing rights, the government will simply reduce catches without any compensation at all. In other words, sell up or else. It leaves men like Ian Mackenzie few choices.
I could possibly try and continue on the reduced cut, but I can't see me surviving. And all that, or else I can take the sort of government handout when they offer it, but I don't really want that either.
The only option that I've got is to try and stay in and hope that a lot of other people get out. So it might raise my quota.
Selwyn Lowe and Ian Mackenzie don't want to sell out because they don't want to move their young families elsewhere, and there aren't any other jobs in Karamea. But under the new law, they and all other fishermen have been given a valuable asset, the ownership of part of a vast resource, a quota that can be traded or sold back to the government. And for some of the bigger fishermen, that's already proved very lucrative. We understand that several of them have received cheques from the government for close to $1 million to stop fishing.
the government has in its payout to date in the first tender round has not really been generous, it's been fair. If that means that some people have got rather large cheques, it's because their operations were worth the rather large cheques.
So far, the government's paid 264 fishermen to reduce their catch. One of them is Cliff Barnes from Northland, who sold half his snapper quota of 24 tonnes a year for $80,000.
They said to us either sell it back or we will probably take it anyhow. So that's why I tendered out.
Cliff Barnes has been fishing for 25 years and hopes to pass on his remaining quota to his two sons. He sees the sense in ITQs.
The inshore fisheries has been a mess over the last few years, and I just believe that if we get this reduction what the government require, eventually for my sons and that, it will become a good business once again.
But while he's benefited financially, Cliff Barnes sees serious problems with the quota scheme. It's already leading fishermen to dump fish that aren't perfect for fear of exceeding their quota.
To survive now, we have to sell our fish for the most that we can get. All the odd fish, the small ones, the big ones, the ones that aren't exactly right for the Japanese market, I would say 99% of the fishermen are going to throw them away. I know this for a fact that fishermen are already doing it.
If dumping becomes common, the catch won't drop as much as MEF hopes. And there are other problems. Many small fishermen predict the big companies will win out at their expense.
Yes, that's the crux of the whole matter, and especially as fishermen see it. Many of the smaller fishermen cannot afford to take any cuts. It makes them uneconomic. The companies, of course, can. We believe the government has to press the larger companies one way or another to relinquish or tender out more of their more fish in this, or to tender out per se in this next round.
I don't think there'll be any pressure brought on by the government. It's our view it makes no economic sense for a large fishing company not to participate in the buyback scheme and therefore chance their arm at a proration reduction without compensation.
The Federation of Commercial Fishermen is holding an emergency national conference later this month to discuss the impact the regulations are having. MEF expects to hear yet more protest.
The protest really flows from the fact that here we have a vast change going on. The system, the ITQ system, is a very structured system, whereas before the fishing industry was used to a hunting environment. And it's akin to fencing the commons. It is the most dramatic single change that a fishery can ever undergo. It's a traumatic change, it's difficult in terms of the detail, and it's difficult in terms of the concepts. A very traumatic time, and no doubt a large part of the industry is finding it very difficult to adjust, and because of that there will be hurts and uncertainties and concerns.
Short term, MEF admits there'll be losers. People who'll be forced to change their lives in ways not necessarily compensated by money. But ITFs have also created a lot of wealth by giving fishermen an asset they didn't have before. And by paying a level of compensation many other beleaguered industries would envy. The question now is whether the scheme will take as much pressure off the fishery as MEF hopes, or whether fishermen will keep on catching as much fish as before, but start dumping all but their quota allowance over the side.
Penny Deans with that report on a new deal for the fishing industry. And still with money matters, New Zealand stockbrokers have launched a campaign designed to clamp down on share market swindlers. They've set up a computer blacklist to identify con men who use false names and addresses. As Stephen Christensen reports.
The computer's being used to help stockbrokers fight bad payers and cheats. Some brokers have been taken for thousands of dollars during the share market boom. One man has conned more than $100,000 from brokers.
From our own firm's point of view, we'd probably be able to supply 10 or 20 names to the list without any problem at all, people who've taken extraordinary length of time to pay. We've even had to threaten bankruptcy.
The cheats buy shares and don't pay if the price falls. Some even try to sell shares they don't own. Busy brokers don't always run full checks on prospective clients.
It'd be fair to say that some firms haven't checked as closely as they should have to check whether that person was creditworthy or not.
Now, many brokers won't deal with someone they don't know or will demand cash up front. They've also enlisted a weapon from a computer firm.
The printout simply lists the defaulting investor, his address, the details, the share broker, the date and amount.
Brokers will pass on names to a blacklist. It'll allow brokerage firms to identify possible troublesome potential clients. But could a client with a genuine dispute over payment be blacklisted?
I hope that everybody who's on that list are only there because, they've been very, very bad payers for no reason at all.
The computer blacklist will help brokers police their own business, a business where it's difficult to prove criminal intent.
That report from Stephen Christensen. We've more to come in Eyewitness News, including a report on a new scheme to help farming in the north. And we feature an interview with the American who was shot down over Nicaragua. Was his plane a government issue or a private army's?
The government is set to pour a lot of money into developing a new horticulture district west of Whangarei. Cabinet has given its blessing to a $16 million subsidy to irrigate rich volcanic soil at Maunga Tapere, 5 years after a group of landowners suggested the scheme. Backers of the development say it has the potential to create more than 1,500 jobs in the north, as John Hudson reports.
Each day during the summer months, millions of litres of water are pumped from the new dams above Kerikeri to feed the fertile fields below. The irrigation network, built by the Ministry of Works 5 years ago at a cost to the taxpayer of $19 million, carries water to 3,000 hectares. In 4 years, the region's output has grown 14-fold. The number of jobs has increased 5-fold, and in a decade, the permanent population has doubled. Kerikeri has boomed at a time when other towns in the north are struggling. Now there are those who think that Maunga Tapere, just west of Whangarei, could become another Kerikeri. The mainstay of the town now is the shrinking dairy business. But Maunga Tapere, it seems, has more to offer than milk. As the first settlers who came to this lush valley last century found, the volcanic loam here is ideal for horticulture. Earlier this month, the Cabinet approved a $15 million scheme to irrigate 1,700 hectares of Maunga Tapere land. 70% of it would be paid for by the taxpayers, the rest repaid by landowners here over 30 years. Most of the water would be drawn from the Wairua River.
It's certainly a subsidy to the landowners, but I see it as one that's tremendous national benefit, and that the capital put into the scheme would be recovered in a very short time through the additional export earnings from such a scheme.
This scheme was first mooted in 1981. Why has it taken 5 years to get to this stage?
The state of the economy hasn't really been a great incentive to people in pastoral farming to change into horticulture. So this has taken quite a long time to sort out with the landowners. In addition to that, there have been a number of changes in government funding policies for irrigation development.
The main task now for the civil servants and those supporting the scheme is to convince landowners the new deal is feasible. The high level of subsidy conflicts with the government's present policies, but it appears Cabinet can live with that if it's to battle the worst unemployment levels in the country. The completion of the Marsden Point project has left 4,600 registered unemployed in the north, nearly 11% of the workforce. Horticulture means jobs.
I think there's something like 500 jobs directly on orchards permanently, a large amount of casual labour during the packing season, and I'm not sure of the exact figure there, but it would be many thousands. But I think the total impact on jobs would be something like 3 or 4 times the 500. This is because of the other jobs that come in on top of the 500 directly on the orchard. So you'd be looking at 1,500 to 2,000 jobs.
Dairy farmers are generally cautious enough to look for fire before jumping out of the frying pan. Jim and Gary Gunson are no exception. They're keen on the irrigation scheme. Their family has owned this farm for more than 75 years, but the returns from the cowshed have taken a dive during the past year. They haven't got the capital to put the whole farm into kiwi fruit, but believe they have a lot to gain, even if others in the region don't.
you can't please everybody. As the government's been telling us to diversify for years, so it's up to the farmers themselves. On our own land here, I would, where the water gets here, we'll subdivide into manageable blocks for horticulture.
What about yourself? Where will you go after that?
Well, I'll probably keep a block myself and try and sell the rest off.
You wouldn't handle a big property. It'd have to be, you know, 10-acre or 15-acre blocks. And a few of them around here now are having a hard job by themselves. They've got to get labour in.
There are already a lot of young plants at Mongatapere. On this 80-hectare farm, the dairy unit was paying for the capital cost of setting up 4 hectares of kiwi fruit. However, with the drop in dairying returns this year, farmer Jim Pram is finding the kiwi fruit is coming out of his overdraft.
Up till to date, my dairy program has backed this 4 hectares of diversification up, and under today's economic system, I can't call on that dairying to stretch any further than that. We're already under pressure, and we can't sustain it any more than the 2 years that it might take for my first fruit to come on stream.
We believe that with the right approach to financing throughout the scheme development, we believe that the capital necessary for the full development can be willingly made available from financiers.
So what is the right sort of financing then?
Well, we believe that with the capital recovery for the scheme, that the investment capital should be put on a inflation-adjusted basis at the very least. And this provides a very big reduction in the burden of repayment, something like 1/2 to 1/3 the cost in meeting the costs of servicing the debt.
So you're asking government for inflation-adjusted finance, or is it going to come from the private sector?
No, I think it should come from the private sector.
Index-linked loans could well be the key to tapping Mongatapere's horticultural potential, but first the financiers and farmers have to be convinced.
John Hudson reporting on new plans for the far north. We go to Nicaragua now, where the American who was captured when his plane was shot down 2 weeks ago said today that United States Vice President George Bush knew about the flights supplying weapons to Nicaragua's Contra rebels. Since Eugene Hassenfuss was captured, each day has brought new disclosures that he and his 2 companions who were killed when their transport plane was downed may have been part of a large covert United States operation to arm the Contras. The Reagan administration has repeatedly denied that the government or any government agency was involved. Tomorrow, Hassenfuss goes on trial before a revolutionary tribunal in Managua, and the Nicaraguans are keen to extract the maximum propaganda value from his revelations. On the eve of his trial, CBS 60 Minutes reporter Mike Wallace interviewed Hassenfuss in Managua and asked him who he was working for and why.
All I know is I was hired in July by a Mr. Cooper to work out of Central America. But I knew Mr. Cooper from back in the present during the Vietnamese War.
Right.
But he hired me underneath what he exactly said we'd be doing the work equivalent to what we did in Southeast Asia, but just a different time, different air, location, etiquette.
Is he the man who was on the plane who was killed?
Yes, sir.
Cooper was CIA when you worked with him for him back in Saigon.
He was Air America.
Which was the CIA airline back then.
Whichever it was, and it was CIA.
Yeah, I mean, you know it and I know it. Everybody knew that Air America was the CIA airline. He was CIA. You were CIA. What you're saying, in effect, is that you were doing the same thing with the same guy in Central America.
Correct. That is exact.
Your contract, let me understand. You were hired and paid as an independent contractor to do what on these flights?
To carry small arms and ammunition into Honduras and Nicaragua.
And drop them to?
The Contra, or the UNO team, or your other Contras.
Max Gomez, do you know who he is?
I know him as an individual from seeing him several times.
Where?
On Ilopango base.
What was his job at Ilopango?
His job was coordination of our drop zones and refueling and taking care of any other logistics we had, such as ID cards, transportation etiquette.
There was talk that he was working with the understanding and approval of George Bush, the Vice President of the United States?
I was told through Mr. Cooper that Mr. Gomez worked for the CIA before.
Before?
And he, through his dealings with the CIA, himself and Mr. George Bush were friends. That was all I was told.
Gomez and Bush were friends?
Correct.
Is this Max Gomez? This?
Yes, that is Max Gomez.
Apparently being decorated by the Salvadorian Air Force for something in that picture.
Appears that way, sir.
Vice President George Bush, who once was director of the CIA, has admitted knowing Max Gomez. Recently, he called him a patriot. But Bush denies any involvement in Gomez's Contra activities. Why do you believe they have the blessing of Vice President Bush?
You say, you put it, they have the blessing. They had his knowledge that he was working and what was happening, and whoever controlled this whole organization, which I do not know, Mr. Gomez, Mr. Bush, I believe a lot of these other people, they know how this is being run. I do not.
Max Gomez is supposed to have spent a good deal of time with a man by the name of Gregg, who was the National Security Advisor to Vice President Bush. Do you know anything of that?
I do not know Mr. Gregg at all.
And did you ever hear his name mentioned in any of this?
No, sir, I haven't.
What went through your mind when all of a sudden the plane was hit, shook, and you're in your parachute on the way down onto Nicaraguan soil?
I just thought it was all over.
You mean you thought you were dead, or?
I thought I was going to be dead, yes. I thought after I was being captured or anything, it'd be all over with, right there.
What do you expect? You're going on trial here the day after tomorrow. What do you expect out of that trial?
I really don't know yet. I haven't had any time to talk to anybody about this yet or anything really.
Do you consider yourself a prisoner of war?
Yes, I do.
Do you feel that the United States has an obligation to come to your rescue?
No. I would like to say yes, but as an individual going out on my own, I would probably say no, but then being tied in with the company the way I was and them knowing what I was doing...
The company being CIA?
Yes. Then I believe I deserve a little bit of backing.
Earlier, before we went on camera, you said to me that you feel that you're between a rock and a hard place. Meaning? Or between the devil and the deep blue sea?
Well, I'm here trying to fight for my existence, which everything is going quite well. And I don't know what's happening at home. I do not know what is happening in my line of defense. I am left in the dark all the way. Today is one of the first days I've had a chance to sit down and talk and really see what is happening.
Who'd you talk to?
Yourself. And that's it right here.
Really? What questions would you like to be able to have answered for you?
Right now, none coming to my mind.
The foreign minister, Miguel Descoto, who was in New York over the past week, told me that he had heard that one of the first things you said when you were captured was, hell, this ain't my war.
That's one of the statements, yes.
What do you mean?
I was hired, I am an American. This is a Nicaraguan war. I am down here as a job. I am not down here as a soldier. So therefore, if this is not my war, I don't believe it's Americans' war.
What do you mean?
What I mean is these people have their own war down here. And right now, I am caught up right in the middle of it.
Eugene Hassenfuss in Nicaragua. On the eve of his trial, he was talking to Mike Wallace. Next we go to the Middle East for a special report on the Iran-Iraq war, which includes unique film shot at the front by the Iranians.
In the Middle East, the long-running Gulf War between Iran and Iraq is now entering its 7th year. Both sides have suffered heavy casualties without apparent gain. But in recent weeks, there have been signs that fortunes may be turning against Iraq. Iran has been amassing hundreds of thousands of troops behind its southern front, and it's believed that over the next few weeks there could be some extremely bloody battles. The BBC's John Simpson was recently allowed into Iran to get a first-hand assessment of the war. His report includes unique footage taken at the front by the Iranians themselves.
Up the line to death. It's impossible not to think in terms of the language and images of the First World War in this conflict which has dragged on year after year, with neither side able to deliver a death blow to the other, and where every offensive bogs down, Passchendaele-like, in the dreadful conditions and the failed tactics of the generals. Death comes in all the forms familiar to the men of Ypres and the Somme. Gas, high explosive, the sniper's bullet. No one can say with certainty how many men on either side have died. 500,000, 1 million? Some estimates have gone higher, and the official claims of the two sides are of little value. The destruction of towns and cities in what was once one of the richest areas for both countries has been wholesale, and the oil industry centered in these same areas for both Iraq and Iran has been seriously disrupted. With each new offensive, the crop of casualties grows, sometimes by the thousand, sometimes in ones and twos, as the war of attrition stretches out. But why should the deadlock have persisted for so long? Much of the answer lies in the relative strengths of the two sides. Iran doesn't have the foreign support the Iraqis enjoy, nor the vast supply of weapons. It's pretty much alone in the world and has to make do with the arms it can buy on the open market. But Iran has one essential advantage which exactly counters the Iraqi superiority in hardware, and that's the number and quality of its troops. These men have all volunteered for the front. Since Iran's population of young men of military age is roughly equal to the total Iraqi population, the Iranians can afford to choose only the best. These volunteers, unlike their enemies, are fired by the kind of self-sacrifice and enthusiasm which we associate with the early part of the First World War, though not with the dreadful years which followed. For Iran, the entire war is being fought as though it were August 1914, despite the mounting cost. The graves multiply with each new offensive the Iranians stage in the slow process of regaining the territory they lost to Iraq in the early stages of the war. Every town and village in Iran has its cemetery like this, and if there are similarities with the First World War, one of them is the enthusiasm with which men face the prospect of dying for their country. Though here, where they're fighting for their religion as well, they regard it as being martyrdom. For the families concerned, the loss of a husband or a son in the prime of life is a private tragedy to be mourned in traditionally public fashion. Today, another funeral. Another family mourns at a simple grave. Most of the soldiers in the Iranian forces are of peasant stock. The supply of working-class volunteers is so great, the authorities don't need to bother too much about the well-to-do, who tend to be less enthusiastic about the war. But aside from the ritual of mourning, there's another and very different emotion about the business of dying in battle. I came across this group of volunteers at the cemetery where they'd been paying their respects at the graves of their dead comrades. These men know very well what it's like at the front, and yet they're clamoring to get back there. I asked them through an interpreter the kind of questions that naturally occur to a skeptical Westerner.
I'm going willingly for the sake of God and for the sake of Islam.
But can you ask him, supposing he gets killed, is he frightened of that? Why not?
Martyrdom is truth, and being martyred in the sake of God is an honor.
It's religion rather than simple patriotism which gives these men their notions of duty and self-sacrifice. and the Shiite religion is ultimately Iran's real secret weapon in the war. This is the shrine at Qom, one of the holiest places in Iran, and we were the first Western television team to be allowed inside it. The Shiite version of Islam is superbly suited to a nation at war. It's a religion which puts heavy emphasis on the need for suffering and endurance. Its founders were defeated and killed in a catastrophic battle with Orthodox Muslims in the 7th century AD. And ever since, Shiites have lived with the sense of a powerful, historic injustice done to them. The fact that Iraq is predominantly Sunni Muslim, like the forces which defeated the Shiite founders, bolsters the Iranian feeling that this is indeed a holy war, a feeling which the clergy encourage.
Islam lays down guidelines for every aspect of life, including peace and war. Now, when a foreign country, which is disrespectful of Islamic principles, is fighting Muslim people, it's our religious duty to fight back. So it's obligatory for us, a religious obligation, to fight the enemy.
How can you explain the willingness of so many Iranians to volunteer to go to the war front and to die for their country if necessary?
The motivation which drives people into fighting a holy war is that death is not the end of life for human being. On the contrary, after death, immortality begins. By taking part in a holy war, people can be sure that immortal deliverance in the next world is guaranteed. So it's natural that anybody would want to be killed 70 times and would still want to come back to life to be killed all over again. It's this perception which creates a love for martyrdom among the Muslim people.
A group of military commanders is granted an audience by the central figure of the Islamic revolution they're fighting for. The familiar features are frailer now and the voice more faint.
شما بخواهید که استحاب نداشته باشید.
But the Ayatollah Khomeini is still the most formidable influence in Iran, even though he has no part in the day-to-day running of the country. Today, the military leaders he's addressing are getting what appears to be a mild rebuke. The regular army commanders have been relegated to little more than onlookers in the war, which is mostly being fought by the volunteers and the Revolutionary Guards, and the regulars don't like it. You all have to work together, Khomeini tells them, and not only you, the entire country. When all these forces join together, we will have a united power. That's what's just starting to worry the surrounding governments in the Middle East very much indeed. If Iran's military commanders can achieve the breakthrough that's eluded them for years now, then they'll be able at last to smash the Iraqis and bring down the government of Saddam Hussein.
Certainly Iran will win the war and no one is hesitant about it. And with God's will, after we defeat the oppressor and topple the government of Iraq, the Muslim people of Iraq will set up their own favored regime, which will naturally be Islamic. This fact is 100% predictable.
ای سپاهیان حق زیر پایتان بغداد ای بسیجیان حق کربلایتان آزاد کربلایتان آزاد.
The faith which has taken Iran from chaos in the early stages of the war to the confident enthusiasm of today isn't going to fade. As far as the volunteers who are beginning to scent victory are concerned, it's greater than ever. If they do defeat Iraq, then it'll make them the dominant power in the region, a rival to Syria, a major challenge to Saudi Arabia, and a positive terror to the small, conservative, anti-revolutionary states of the Gulf. The real power of Islamic fundamentalism may only now be dawning.
A report from the BBC. On to tomorrow's weather now, and it'll be unsettled in most districts as a front moves over the South Island and onto the west of the North Island. This afternoon's satellite picture shows a cold front cloud band advancing onto New Zealand from the west, followed by widespread shower cloud over the western Tasman. North of New Zealand are streaks of high-level jet stream cloud. Tomorrow's noon map, a cold front will have crossed much of the South Island and will be approaching the west of the North Island. The front is followed by a westerly airstream. Forecast for tomorrow in the North Island, fine at first, but fresh northerlies and rain spreading from the west tomorrow afternoon or evening. However, the rain is unlikely to reach eastern districts until early Wednesday. In the west of the South Island, a band of rain crossing the area tonight and in the morning, followed by cooler westerlies with a few showers. Over the rest of the South Island, scattered rain spreading from the western ranges, mainly fine again tomorrow afternoon. Main centre forecasts: Auckland, rain late tomorrow, 13 and 18. Wellington, rain from the afternoon, 11 and 15. Christchurch, brief rain, 10 and 20. Dunedin, brief rain, 10 and 16.
To close tonight's news, Civil Defence has now called off the warning of a possible tsunami or tidal wave following a severe earthquake near the Kermadec Islands earlier this evening. It's now known that the wave caused by the earthquake was only about 10 centimetres high. The other main points in tonight's news: a man has been arrested in connection with the disappearance of the 6-year-old Christchurch girl. And Mozambique's President Machel is reported missing after a plane crash.
We'll be back tomorrow with a report on the industry that makes that vital but often neglected part of our wardrobes, footwear. Although we all need shoes, just how well is the industry doing? Until then, good night from Wellington, Angela.
Thanks, Lindsay, and that's our programme at the start of a new week. We'll be here again tomorrow night at 10. Till then, good night.